Welcome to Sound of Hope News. My name is Daniela Wolensack, and today is July 5th. Chinese-Canadian tycoon Xiao Jianhua will stand on trial in Shanghai starting this week. He has been laundering money for political officials. Macau hits its biggest COVID outbreak since the start of the pandemic. Massive nucleic acid testing will begin there on July 4th. COVID outbreaks have appeared in 12 cities in China. Cities like Shanghai have begun sealing areas with steel plates, while Wuxi sends residents to mass isolation centers. NATO invited several Indo-Pacific countries for the first time to its summit. They addressed the China-Russia problem and world trade. Finally, San Francisco hosts its first Hong Kong Carnival to remember the city's unique history. Thousands participated in the festivities. Let's get into it. Five years after alleged abduction in Hong Kong, Chinese-Canadian tycoon Xiao Jianhua was put on trial in China. On Monday, July 4th, the Canadian embassy in Beijing confirmed that Xiao's trial had begun this week. According to Hong Kong media, Xiao's investigation was a top priority in Zhongnanhai, the seat of government in Beijing. He was likely to be charged with illegally collecting public deposits. These carry a prison sentence of many years, depending on severity, according to the Wall Street Journal. Xiao was a student leader at the prestigious Peking University in 1989. However, he sided with the Chinese regime during the student protests in Tiananmen Square. Later, he found wealth during the country's economic boom. Until 2017, the 50-year-old man was one of China's richest businessmen. He had high-level connections to the central government and senior Communist Party officials. According to the research group Huren Report, by 2016, Xiao was worth $6 billion, with investments in banking, property, and information technology through a myriad of complex structures. Xiao is a prime example of how business and politics go hand in hand in China. Chinese news reports have been silent about Xiao's case. It's linked to the corruption investigations in Beijing, according to an inside source. The source told the Epoch Times that Xiao shared ties with Zheng Qinghong, the former Chinese regime vice chairman and chief political enabler of former Chinese leader Jiang Zemin. Since 2013, Xi has been purging members of Jiang's powerful political faction in the Chinese regime and in Hong Kong. Previously, Jiang was the Chinese regime's de facto ruler, owing to his appointment of top governing bodies with factional allies. Xiao was the most important money launderer of the Jiang faction. The source said, working through Xiao Jianhua and other traders, the Jiang faction emptied out China's state coffers. According to the Hong Kong securities industry, Xiao was responsible for several financial maneuvers, aiming to move huge amounts of capital out of China through Hong Kong. Xiao's abrupt disappearance gained international attention. In January 2017, he was escorted away from Hong Kong's Four Seasons Hotel in a wheelchair, allegedly by plainclothes Chinese security agents, who, at the time, were not permitted to operate in Hong Kong, according to the New York Times. Many worried that residents were being forced to disappear. This would have been a breach of the one country, two systems promise to Hong Kong. In 2020, Beijing imposed a national security law in Hong Kong, which allowed its security agencies to operate in the city and topple the legal firewall between mainland and Hong Kong courts. To Xiao's family, this week's trial may put an end to a long wait. The Chinese Communist Party's zero-COVID policy hasn't been very effective. In the last week, outbreaks have occurred in 10 provinces and 12 cities in China, including Anhui, Shanghai, Guangdong, and Liaoning. Among them, Anhui has the most serious outbreak. In the past 8 days, 850 new local cases were reported there. The epidemic also rebounded in Shanghai, with 1 new high-risk area and 2 new medium-risk areas in Putuo and Baoshan districts on July 3rd. Workers began sealing off areas in Shanghai with steel plates. The city of Wuxi, Jiangsu province, is in a lockdown as well. On July 3rd, netizens broke the news. A suspected positive patient appeared in the obstetrics and gynecology department of Wuxi People's Hospital, and the entire obstetrics and gynecology department went into lockdown. All mothers and babies were taken away and put in special isolation centers. Here, we see pregnant women are required to wear blue protective clothing. Others are holding their newborn babies. They are waiting to get on a bus. In this video, despite the summer heat, thousands of residents must wear white protective clothing. They are waiting to be taken from Wuxi City to a mass isolation center. Whether they want to or not, all of them will be isolated. Here we see Wuxi is stepping up its efforts to build the Fengshan Hospital. Netizens say the clearing and sealing control seriously affects people's lives. Omicron is not the disease control is. There is an issue with how the government thinks. Macau is currently facing its worst outbreak since the beginning of the pandemic. It began nucleic acid testing for more than 600,000 residents in the city on July 4th. Authorities hope it will help control the rising cases. According to Reuters, all residents will be tested 3 times this week. People must also take a quick antigen screening test. On Sunday, 90 new cases were reported in Macau, bringing the total number of infections since mid-June to 784. More than 11,000 people are in isolation. Macau is a special administrative region of China, but is not yet in a total lockdown like Shanghai. However, the city is essentially closed. All non-essential government service has been closed. Schools, parks, sports, and entertainment facilities have also been closed, and restaurants are only available for takeout. Casinos were allowed to remain open, but most workers, like the general public, were instructed to stay at home. The government said it would not close casinos to protect jobs. Macau will adhere to the Chinese Communist Party's zero policy of removing all infections at all costs. The policy runs counter to the global trend of trying to coexist with the virus. Macau has an open border with mainland China, and many residents live and work in the neighboring city of Zhuhai. The recent NATO summit adopted a new version of its strategic concept. For the first time, the CCP is listed as a systemic challenge since NATO's founding in 1949. Also, for the first time, the summit invited Indo-Pacific countries to participate. They included Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. This was an effort to expand NATO's influence to the Asia-Pacific region. Experts believe that a two-sided containment strategy against China and Russia is taking shape. NATO emphasized that it will strengthen the awareness, resilience, and preparedness against China's coercive means and attempts to split the alliance. NATO also reiterated that the ally nations will defend the international order, including freedom of navigation. The Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for more than 4 months. China and Russia seem to have figured out how to respond to global sanctions. The hidden strategic alliance between the two countries is also becoming more and more evident. Russia recently agreed to allow the CCP's Belt and Road Initiative to go deep into Central Asia. A professor of political science at the National Chengdu University in Taiwan, Wang Hongren, elaborated for the Epoch Times. For 10 years, NATO countries have been observing whether the CCP is a genial opportunity, a challenge, or a threat. The assessment reached its conclusion when the CCP expanded its military presence outside China. The evidence also included threats to maritime activities in the South China Sea, cyber attacks on Europe, theft of intellectual property, and many other issues. The NATO members are just now realizing that China's negative influence has been expanding. Professor Wang said that Russia is seen as an immediate threat. The CCP is considered a long-term, omnipresent threat. And he believes that the CCP has stepped on NATO's bottom line. The CCP used the so-called China-style policy as an excuse to undermine the international order established after World War II. Previously, the NATO Secretary General mentioned the CCP's bullying of Taiwan. The British Foreign Secretary even called on NATO to provide arms sales to Taiwan. The director of the National Defense Strategy Institute of Taiwan, Su Ziyun, said, NATO has gradually moved from a land NATO emphasizing ground and aviation forces to a marine NATO focusing on the oceans. The Euro-Asian Maritime Line is formed by the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait in East Asia. The security of this supply chain channel between the EU and Northeast Asia is critically important, but the CCP wants to internalize the Taiwan Strait. Such an exclusive sovereignty claim will certainly make neighboring countries and even Europe feel threatened. NATO's other key concern is that China is expanding its nuclear weaponries. The CCP is trying to change the global power structure. This would certainly make the United States and Europe feel threatened. The invitation of Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand to participate in the NATO summit is therefore a logical move. On July 1st, the 25th anniversary of the handover of Hong Kong sovereignty, Xi Jinping came to Hong Kong and called Hong Kong reborn from ashes after wind and rain. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken and members of Congress from both parties pointed out, democracy in Hong Kong has disappeared. How can it be reborn from ashes? Chairman of the U.S. Congressional Administration Committee on China, Jeff Merkley, and the committee's co-chair, Jim McGovern, issued a written statement saying, "We hope that democracy and freedom will once again shape Hong Kong's future." McGovern told Voice of America, "The people of Hong Kong have shown such great courage that they have inspired the rest of the world to stand up to Beijing's atrocities. We will not forget them, and we will always stand by them. We have an obligation to support those who are oppressed, fleeing violence and fleeing persecution." In addition, on July 2nd, a unique Hong Kong Carnival was held in Milpitas, San Francisco. It received an enthusiastic response and was very crowded. According to the organizers, at least 5,000 to 6,000 people showed up on that day. The event was originally scheduled to end at 6 p.m., but many stalls were sold out by 4 p.m. After the turmoil of the anti-extradition movement in 2019 and the totalitarian national security law, the Hong Kong people have become silent. Many have fled. One of the event organizers, Fang Zhanbo, said that the original intent of the Hong Kong Carnival was to unite overseas Chinese and Hong Kong people with Hong Kong culture, to help and support each other. On that day, a Hong Kong station was set up at the event's entrance. The public seemed to take the subway to enter a Hong Kong market and enjoy various food and music performances. Senior media person Cheng Xiang states that many Hong Kong people have been forced to leave their hometown in recent years. He said, "Hong Kong is the essence of the combination of Chinese and Western cultures. The erosion of such a unique essence by power is not only the loss of Hong Kong people, but also the loss of world culture." Although many want to eliminate the colonial culture, Cheng Xiang believes the colony of Hong Kong had a dual nature. Thanks to its British colonial past, Hong Kong has developed with both Chinese and Western cultural influences. Because the CCP is trying to eliminate this unique history, many people actively participating in the Hong Kong Carnival to preserve Hong Kong's culture and traditions. Cheng Xiang, who was forced to leave Hong Kong by the CCP regime, said, "I have to say that I have some nostalgia. Pineapple oil, egg cakes, and bowl cakes are all things I like to eat in Hong Kong. Today, I could eat Hong Kong's special diet here." The organizers expected about 2,000 people to participate in the event, but the network response was very enthusiastic. To keep the visit in order, the organizers had to control the flow of people entering the venue. The organizers believe that after the British colonization and cultural exchanges with the East Asian countries, Hong Kong paid more attention to the spirit of the rule of law and the pursuit of freedom. These are in line with the universal values of the West. Many Hong Kongers who emigrated to the United States support the identity of Hong Kong people. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. See you tomorrow.